After 8 years silently rebuilding my family's failing company, I sat in the executive boardroom as my brother Jason fixed his tie and glared at me. "You need to understand something, Emily," he said, leaning forward with a smirk. "Dad's retiring tomorrow and I'm taking over as CEO. Your first assignment from me? Clean out your desk by the end of the day. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." My stomach dropped, but I kept my expression neutral as I'd learned to do through years of being underestimated. "Is there a particular reason?" I asked calmly, though my heart pounded against my ribs. Jason laughed, adjusting his gold cufflinks, a gift from our father that I had actually selected. "Because you're just the operations manager, and I'm restructuring the department. I need someone with actual vision in that role." I nodded slowly, gathering my portfolio as he continued to explain how Mitchell Precision Technologies needed fresh blood and innovative leadership. Ironically, all buzzwords from the strategic plan I had authored 6 months ago. The journey that led me to that boardroom confrontation began long before I ever took a position at Mitchell Precision Technologies. To understand how I ended up secretly running our family's industrial automation company while being treated as little more than an administrative convenience, you need to understand where it all started. Mitchell Precision wasn't always the struggling enterprise I'd eventually rescue from bankruptcy. My grandfather George founded the company in his workshop back in 1983, when computerized industrial controls were just beginning to transform manufacturing. He was an engineer with an uncanny ability to see how technology could make factories more efficient. I grew up trailing behind him through the original production facility, fascinated by the complex systems he designed. While most kids my age played with dolls, I was sketching electrical diagrams and learning programming languages. My grandfather would review my drawings with the same serious consideration he gave his senior engineers. "You see patterns others miss, Emily," he told me once while we troubleshot a malfunctioning controller. "That's a rare gift, especially in this industry. Remember that." My father Thomas, however, saw things differently. An accountant by training who married into the family business, he viewed Mitchell Precision as his entitlement rather than his responsibility. To him, the company was a source of status in our community of Riverdale, not the innovation hub my grandfather had envisioned. And then there was my brother Jason, 7 years older and eternally positioned as the heir apparent despite his complete lack of technical understanding. Where I spent my childhood learning every aspect of automation systems, Jason focused on looking the part of a business leader. Perfect suits, firm handshakes, and absolutely no knowledge of what our company actually produced. "Engineering is for the employees," my father would say whenever I expressed interest in our product development. "Leadership is about vision and relationships." This perspective informed every decision he made, including his reaction when I graduated with highest honors from Carnegie Mellon with dual degrees in robotics engineering and business administration. "That's nice, honey," he said, barely glancing at my diploma. "It's good to be well-rounded. Maybe you can help with our marketing materials." The dismissal stung, but not as much as what happened the following week. Jason, who had barely graduated, with his general business degree from the State University, was announced as the new Vice President of Strategy and Innovation. My qualifications earned me an offer to help out with operations, with no actual title or authority. I might have walked away then, if not for a private conversation with my grandfather, who was by that point semi-retired but still on the board. "The company's in trouble, Emily," he confided one evening at his home, spreading financial reports across his kitchen table. "Thomas and Jason don't see it or won't acknowledge it, but we're 6 months from insolvency if drastic changes aren't made." Mitchell Precision had fallen critically behind our competitors. While the industry had evolved toward AI-driven automation and adaptive systems, we were still pushing incremental improvements to decade-old technology. Our client base was eroding, our talent was leaving, and our innovation pipeline was empty. "Why tell me this?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Grandpa George smiled sadly. "Because you're the only one who can fix it. Not with your name on the door. Your father and brother would never allow that, but from within the system itself. You want me to take a job beneath my qualifications and secretly rescue the company while they take credit?" I clarified, trying to keep the bitterness from my voice. "I want you to save your grandfather's legacy," he replied simply. "How you do it is up to you." 2 days later, he suffered a massive stroke. In his hospital room, barely able to speak, he pressed a small flash drive into my palm. "Contingency," he whispered, "when the time comes." He passed away the following morning. The funeral was elaborate, befitting a community leader and successful founder. My father gave a stirring eulogy about continuing George's vision, while Jason stood solemnly beside him, the perfect picture of the grieving grandson and future leader. I stood slightly apart, the flash drive heavy in my pocket, understanding that my grandfather's final gift wasn't just data. It was a chance to preserve what he'd built, even if no one knew I was the one doing it. 2 weeks after the funeral, I approached my father and requested a position at Mitchell Precision. "A position?" he repeated, surprised. "I thought you were interviewing with those big tech firms in Austin." "I want to be part of Grandpa's legacy," I said simply. He considered this briefly. "I suppose we could find something suitable, perhaps in marketing or human resources, something that wouldn't be too demanding." I chose my words carefully. Actually, I was thinking I could start in operations, learn the business from the ground up. This appealed to his ego. His overqualified daughter taking a humble role would reinforce the narrative that leadership positions were reserved for the men in the family. Plus, he clearly assumed I'd eventually get frustrated and leave for a DC. More prestigious position elsewhere. "Well, if that's what you want," he said with a dismissive wave. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The operations team could use some organization, I suppose. Little did he know, operations gave me visibility into everything. Production processes, client relationships, supply chains, financials, product development, and most importantly, the full scope of just how dangerously close Mitchell Precision was to collapse. Within my first month, I discovered we were losing $200,000 monthly, with barely enough cash reserves to last through the quarter. Our flagship control systems were 2 generations behind our competitors. Our client retention rate had plummeted to 42%, and our top engineering talent was updating their resumes. So I began my shadow work. Small changes at first, reorganizing workflows, eliminating redundancies, connecting departments that should have been collaborating. I used my position in operations to implement improvements that no one noticed until they started working. When our lead systems architect quit in frustration, I personally recruited an innovative replacement, Alex Wong, a brilliant engineer who had worked with me at Carnegie Mellon. Officially, I was just passing along resumes, but in reality, I conducted the entire hiring process while making my father and Jason believe they had made the decision. "This new guy has some interesting ideas," Jason commented after Alex's first presentation, not realizing that the interesting ideas had actually been developed through late-night strategy sessions between Alex and me. When our market approach was failing, I completely restructured it and filtered the changes through various departments, so they appeared to emerge organically rather than from the operations manager, who was barely included in strategic discussions. For 3 years, I rebuilt Mitchell Precision from within its crumbling walls, piece by careful piece. Every success was attributed to the leadership team. Every innovative solution was credited to departments who had merely implemented my ideas. I became the ghost in the machine, the unseen architect of our revival. And through it all, I was still just Emily from operations, taking notes, organizing meetings, and silently saving the very company my father and brother were driving into the ground. The transformation didn't happen overnight. It was a methodical process that required strategy, patience, and the willingness to let others take credit for my work. My first priority was understanding exactly how dire our situation was. Under the guise of streamlining information flow, I conducted a comprehensive audit of our finances, products, and client relationships. The results confirmed my grandfather's assessment. We were in even worse shape than he had realized. Our flagship control systems were not only technically outdated, but had accumulated so much technical debt that even minor updates required heroic efforts from our engineers. Client complaints were being systematically buried rather than addressed. Our cash reserves would be completely depleted within 4 months at our current burn rate. Most concerning was our complete lack of an innovation pipeline. While our competitors were developing machine learning models to optimize factory operations, we were still trying to sell marginally improved versions of 10-year-old technology. Armed with this knowledge, I created a 3-phase rescue plan. First, stop the bleeding by cutting unnecessary expenses and stabilizing our core business. Second, revitalize our existing products with targeted improvements to retain current clients. Third, develop new offerings that would position us for future growth. The challenge wasn't developing the plan, it was implementing it without anyone realizing I was the one doing it. I needed to make my father and Jason believe these ideas were their own, or at least coming from appropriate channels within the organization. I started with small suggestions during meetings, carefully phrased as questions. I was organizing the client feedback data and noticed several mentioned similar issues with the UI interface. Has the product team considered simplifying the control dashboard? Or, while analyzing the vendor contracts, I saw we're paying 3 different suppliers for essentially the same components. Would it make sense to consolidate? Most of my suggestions were initially dismissed, but I'd carefully plant the seeds with multiple people. Eventually, someone else would raise the same point, and suddenly it would be considered a brilliant observation. I learned to celebrate these moments rather than resent them. Each implemented idea meant Mitchell Precision was one step closer to survival. For larger strategic changes, I needed allies. I identified key employees throughout the organization who recognized our problems and wanted to solve them, people who were competent but overlooked, much like me. Alex Wong in product development became my first major ally. He had brilliant ideas for modernizing our control systems, but had been repeatedly shut down by management. During a lunch break one afternoon, I mentioned that I'd seen some of his proposal drafts while organizing the product roadmap documentation. "Those adaptive learning algorithms look really innovative," I said casually. "Have you ever considered presenting them directly to the implementation team instead of going through the formal approval process?" He looked surprised. "The operations manager is giving me business strategy advice." I smiled. The operations manager sees a lot of things, including which departments actually have budget discretion versus who just likes to act important. That conversation led to Alex bypassing the traditional approval process and working directly with client-facing teams to implement his improvements. The results were immediate. Client satisfaction scores increased 47%, and renewal rates stabilized. My father and Jason took credit for the management restructuring that allowed this innovation to happen, never realizing I had orchestrated the entire process. This pattern repeated across departments. I identified talented people, connected them with resources and opportunities, and gradually built a shadow network of employees who were actually running the company effectively while the official leadership enjoyed the results of our work. The financial turnaround began in year 2. Our cost-cutting measures had stemmed the immediate crisis, and our product improvements were retaining valuable clients. I began phase 3, developing new offerings. By connecting our best engineers with industry trends I monitored through careful research, I sparked discussions that eventually led to completely new development directions. I was organizing the competitive intelligence reports, I would say, to Alex and his team, and noticed something interesting about what Axiom Systems is developing. Their approach seems to be focusing on predictive maintenance rather than just monitoring. These observations would launch discussions that eventually led to new development priorities that positioned us ahead of market shifts rather than perpetually behind them. By year 3, we had launched our first truly innovative product line in a decade, a machine learning-powered predictive maintenance system that could identify potential equipment failures before they happened. It quickly became our most profitable offering, and industry analysts who had written off Mitchell Precision as a dying company were now praising our visionary leadership. That leadership, of course, meant Jason, who became the face of our success. He gave interviews about his strategic vision and commitment to innovation, concepts he barely understood, much less implemented. My father basked in the validation that his son was indeed the rightful heir to the Mitchell legacy. I continued my work in the shadows, expanding my influence and gradually taking control of more critical functions. I established direct relationships with our largest clients, initially making contact for operational alignment, but eventually becoming their trusted advisor on implementation strategies. I restructured our hiring processes to attract top talent. I initiated strategic partnerships that opened new market opportunities. Throughout it all, I maintained my cover as the efficient but unremarkable operations manager. I dressed professionally, but conservatively, spoke minimally in meetings unless asked direct questions, and perfected the art of being forgettable. Present, but not noteworthy. I learned that people rarely monitor what they don't perceive as a threat, giving me extraordinary freedom to operate. The most difficult part wasn't the work itself. It was watching my brother take credit for my achievements. Each time he presented my strategies as his own, each time he received applause for results he had nothing to do with, I had to remind myself of the bigger picture. This wasn't about recognition. It was about saving my grandfather's company and legacy. By year 5, Mitchell Precision Technologies had transformed completely. Our valuation had grown from a struggling $3 million to a robust $10 million. We had expanded from regional to national clients. Our products were winning industry awards, and our growth trajectory had made us an attractive investment opportunity. All of this, every dollar of growth, every successful product launch, every saved client relationship, had been orchestrated by the woman everyone still referred to as just the operations manager. But I wasn't invisible anymore, and soon, everyone would know it. During my 8th year at Mitchell Precision, my father announced his retirement. Everyone assumed Jason would be named CEO, not as something to earn, but as something he was entitled to by birth and gender. The company had reached a critical inflection point. We needed decisive leadership to capitalize on our growth. I've called this meeting to discuss the future of Mitchell Precision, my father began, his voice carrying the authoritative tone he'd perfected over decades. As you all know, I'll be stepping down at the end of the month. I kept my expression neutral, hands steady as I pretended to take notes. This was it, the moment when surely my father would acknowledge that Jason's leadership had coincided with our remarkable turnaround, and therefore he would be the natural choice for CEO. Jason has been groomed for this position his entire life, my father continued, gesturing to my brother, who sat straighter in his chair. He understands Mitchell's legacy and has the vision to take us forward. The room broke into polite applause as Jason stood, straightening his designer suit. I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach, but kept my face carefully blank. 8. Years of practice hiding my emotions served me well in this moment. "Thank you, Dad," Jason said, voice confident, despite his complete lack of qualification. "I'm honored to accept this responsibility and continue our family's legacy." I watched, as board members nodded appreciatively, None of them knew that Jason couldn't explain how our newest technology worked, couldn't name our top 5 clients, and certainly couldn't identify which product lines were driving our growth. Additionally, my father continued, we'll be bringing in Stephanie Clark as Chief Operating Officer to support Jason during this transition. Her experience at Vector Controls will be invaluable. This was unexpected. Stephanie Clark was indeed experienced, but she was also my brother's fiancée, a fact they had kept carefully hidden from the public as it would look like obvious nepotism. They had met at an industry conference where Jason was taking credit for product innovations I had developed with Alex's team. As the meeting concluded, various board members approached Jason with congratulations. I gathered my notebook and tablet, preparing to slip out quietly as usual. But my brother's voice stopped me. Emily, I need to speak with you privately. I followed him to the small conference room adjacent to the boardroom, already sensing what was coming. I'll be restructuring the operations department, he said without preamble once the door closed. Behind us. Stephanie has some ideas about streamlining our processes. I see, I replied, keeping my voice neutral. And what does that mean for my position? He didn't even have the decency to look uncomfortable. Your position is being eliminated. Stephanie will be bringing in her own team. After 8 years? I asked, allowing just a hint of emotion to show. After helping build this company. From near bankruptcy to $10 million in valuation? Jason laughed dismissively. Come on, Emily. You've been managing schedules and organizing reports. Important work, sure, but let's not exaggerate your contribution. The strategic decisions that transformed this company came from leadership. Something in me snapped. 8 years of invisibility. 8 years of using my engineering degree to organize folders while watching my innovations attributed to others. 8 years of building something my brother was now preparing to take from me. You need to understand something, Emily, he said, leaning forward with that smirk I had come to despise. Dad's retiring tomorrow, and I'm taking over as CEO. Your first assignment from me? Clean out your desk by the end of the day. I nodded slowly. The perfect picture of the accommodating team player. Of course. Anything else? Just remember your place, he added, already turning toward the door. You're just the operations manager, and not even that anymore. I smiled politely, but inside, a decision crystallized. My grandfather's voice seemed to whisper in my ear, "The time for hiding is over, Emily." That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I prepared. I reviewed documents I'd kept secured for years. I made calls to people whose loyalty I had carefully cultivated. I finalized arrangements that had been waiting for precisely this moment. By morning, I was ready. This wouldn't just be a confrontation. It would be a reckoning. They had dismissed me as just the operations manager for the last time. The transformation of Mitchell Precision Technologies didn't happen overnight. It required methodical planning, strategic patience, and an almost superhuman ability to let others take credit for my work. In the aftermath of my brother telling me to clear out my desk, I found myself reflecting on the long journey that had brought me to this moment of reckoning. My second year at Mitchell had been when the real transformation began. I began by identifying the emerging trends that would reshape industrial automation over the next decade. Machine learning, predictive maintenance, adaptive systems that could reconfigure themselves based on changing production requirements. Our competitors were making tentative steps in these directions, but none had yet developed a comprehensive approach that integrated all 3 elements. That was our opportunity. During a routine operations review meeting with Alex and his engineering team, I casually mentioned an article I'd read about predictive failure analysis in manufacturing systems. The most interesting thing was how they combined vibration analysis with thermal imaging to predict component failures before they occurred, I said, deliberately understating the revolutionary potential. It reminded me of some research papers from Carnegie Mellon a few years back. Alex, always quick to see connections, leaned forward. You know, that could be applied to our control systems. If we integrated those capabilities, we could provide value beyond just automation. We could help clients prevent costly downtime. I nodded as if this was a new insight to me. That sounds interesting. Would something like that be difficult to develop? With the right parameters and data models, it's definitely feasible, he replied, already sketching concepts on his tablet. Later that week, I discovered a relevant dataset from one of our manufacturing clients and suggested Alex might find it useful for testing theoretical models. What I didn't mention was that I had spent 6 months secretly collecting this data, specifically to provide the foundation for the predictive maintenance system I knew we needed to develop. Within 3 months, Alex and his team had created a prototype that could accurately predict equipment failures 72 hours before they occurred. The potential value for our manufacturing clients was enormous. Preventing even a single hour of unplanned downtime could save them hundreds of thousands of dollars. When the prototype was ready for demonstration, I made sure my father and Jason were present, positioning them to take credit for this breakthrough innovation. Jason was particularly eager to claim the spotlight, even though he couldn't explain the basic principles of how the system worked. This exemplifies the forward-thinking approach I've been pushing for, he announced during the executive presentation, standing beside the technical demonstration that Alex was conducting. I maintained my carefully neutral expression, but inside, I felt a mixture of pride in what I had orchestrated and frustration at the misattribution. This pattern had become so familiar it was almost comical. I would identify an opportunity, plant the seeds of innovation, nurture its development through my network of allies, and then watch as my brother claimed the harvest as his own. But the results spoke for themselves. Our new predictive maintenance module became the fastest-growing product in Mitchell Precision's history. Within 6 months of its launch, we had signed contracts with 3 major manufacturing conglomerates, increasing our annual recurring revenue by 40%. Industry publications that had previously ignored Mitchell Precision began featuring articles about our innovative approach and visionary leadership. Jason was invited to speak at conferences, where he would repeat talking points I had prepared. For him, occasionally stumbling when asked technical questions he couldn't answer. Our approach integrates multiple data streams through proprietary algorithms, he would say vaguely when cornered, before quickly redirecting to prepared statements about client value and operational excellence. Meanwhile, I continued expanding my shadow network throughout the organization. Rachel Santos had been promoted to Client Success Director based on the remarkable retention rates she had achieved using my strategies. David Patel now headed our finance department, implementing the sophisticated forecasting models I had developed. Alex Wong had become our Chief Technology Officer, though he still reported to Jason, who understood nothing of the technology Alex was developing under my guidance. By year 5, Mitchell Precision Technologies had completely transformed. Our valuation had grown from a struggling $3 million enterprise to a robust $10 million operation with strong growth projections. We had expanded from regional clients to national contracts with industry leaders. Our technology was winning awards at trade shows, and our financial performance had attracted attention from potential investors. All of this, every dollar of growth, every successful product launch, every saved client relationship, had been orchestrated by the woman everyone still dismissed as just the operations manager. But I wasn't simply rebuilding the company. With the immediate financial crisis temporarily stabilized through targeted cost reductions, I turned my attention to revitalizing our outdated product line. The challenge wasn't designing better solutions, it was implementing them without anyone realizing I was the driving force. I started by creating a detailed analysis of our competitors' offerings, disguised as an operations efficiency report. Buried within the document were specific technical recommendations that, if implemented, would dramatically improve our control systems. I strategically placed copies where our senior engineers would find them, making sure the ideas appeared to be casual observations rather than directives. These market comparison metrics are interesting, Alex Wong mentioned during a team meeting, gesturing to the report I'd left in the break room. If we modified our current adaptive algorithms with these parameters, we could potentially close the gap with Axiom systems. My father and Jason, neither of whom understood the technical details, nodded as if this was exactly what they'd been thinking. That afternoon, I accidentally sent Alex an old research paper from my Carnegie Mellon days that outlined the exact implementation method he would need. Within 3 months, our core product line had undergone a remarkable transformation. Client satisfaction ratings jumped 62%, and several customers who had been contemplating leaving renewed their contracts. Jason, of course, took full credit during the quarterly review. My strategic direction for the engineering team has really paid off, he announced to the board, flashing slides that I had prepared showing the dramatic improvement in performance metrics. I remember catching Alex's eye across the conference room, a brief moment of shared understanding before I carefully lowered my gaze back to my notes. That was how I built my shadow network of allies. Meaningful glances, subtle nods, carefully worded emails that conveyed more to the recipient than appeared on the surface. Rachel Santos in client relations became my next major collaborator. I noticed she was exceptionally talented at maintaining relationships, but was being systematically undermined by our outdated client management systems. During a routine operations review, I suggested a small process change that gave her direct access to engineering resources without going through the standard bureaucratic channels. "This new workflow is amazing," she told me a few weeks later. "I resolved the Meridian manufacturing issue in 2 days instead of 2 months. How did you know this would work?" I shrugged casually. Operations is all about removing obstacles. I just noticed the pattern. What I didn't tell her was that I'd mapped every inefficiency in our client response system and had a comprehensive redesign ready to implement piecemeal, each change small enough to avoid scrutiny, but collectively, powerful enough to transform our client experience. Rachel became an unwitting ambassador for my vision, implementing suggestions I filtered through her and reporting remarkable improvements that my father and Jason incorrectly attributed to their leadership culture. By the end of my 3rd year, I had built a network of these unintentional allies throughout Mitchell Precision, talented individuals who executed my strategies without realizing they were part of a coordinated effort to revitalize the company. David Patel in finance implemented my cost models thinking they were his own insights. Kate Rodriguez in human resources restructured our hiring protocols based on industry best practices I had compiled and left on her desk. None of them knew they were executing a comprehensive corporate turnaround orchestrated by the operations manager, who sat quietly in meetings, taking notes, and being systematically overlooked by the official leadership. The most challenging aspect of my approach wasn't developing the strategies. It was maintaining the invisibility required to implement them. I learned to modulate my voice in meetings, speaking just enough to be heard, but not so much that I would be remembered. I dressed professionally but conservatively, avoiding anything distinctive. I kept my technical insights deliberately muted when my father or Jason was present, saving my true analysis for private conversations with those who could actually implement solutions. I became a ghost in the system of my own design, directing Mitchell Precision's transformation from the shadows while the men in my family stood in the spotlight. The technical revival of our product line was only the beginning. By year 4, I turned my attention to the most critical challenge, creating truly innovative solutions that would position Mitchell Precision for long-term success. This required more than incremental improvements to existing technology. We needed entirely new thinking. Throughout these years, I had been carefully documenting everything. Every strategy I developed, every innovation I conceived, every improvement I implemented was meticulously recorded with dates, specific contributions, and measurable outcomes. I maintained a parallel record of the company's transformation. the official narrative that credited my father and Jason, and the reality that only I fully understood. I also took the time to examine the contents of the flash drive my grandfather had given me during his final days. What I found was both shocking and empowering. A complete restructuring of Mitchell Precision's ownership that my grandfather had executed 3 months before his death. The documents revealed that while my father retained 35% ownership and Jason held 15%, the remaining 50% had been transferred to a holding company called MPT Innovation Trust, and the sole trustee of that entity was me, Emily Mitchell. I was the majority shareholder of Mitchell Precision Technologies. My grandfather had left me with more than a mission. He had given me the legal authority to fulfill it. For years, I had kept this information private, hoping that my contributions would eventually be recognized on their merit alone, that my father and brother would see beyond their biases and acknowledge my capabilities. But that hope had proven naive. Despite transforming the company from near bankruptcy to thriving success, I remained invisible to them, a subordinate rather than an equal, much less a leader. The flash drive contained more than just ownership documentation. There was a personal letter from my grandfather, written weeks before his death. Emily, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you've found yourself in the position I feared. Your contributions diminished, your capabilities overlooked because of nothing more than outdated thinking and unfortunate biases. I've watched you grow from a curious child who could troubleshoot a control circuit at age 10 into a brilliant engineer and strategic thinker. Mitchell Precision needs exactly what you offer: technical understanding combined with business acumen and genuine care for the legacy we've built together. Thomas and Jason cannot see this. They measure leadership by confidence rather than competence, by appearance rather than results. I've tried for years to help them understand what truly matters in this business, but they're entrenched in their thinking. So I've taken steps to ensure Mitchell Precision's future. The ownership documents on this drive transfer controlling interest to you through a structure that will be difficult for them to challenge. I had hoped you wouldn't need to use this, that your work would speak for itself, and they would recognize what I've always seen in you. But I know my son and grandson too well to leave this to chance. When the time comes, when you've proven to yourself what you're capable of, when you've rebuilt what they've nearly destroyed, claim your rightful place. Not because of whose daughter you are, but because of what you've built. With love and complete confidence, Grandpa George III read this letter dozens of times over the years, drawing strength from it during particularly difficult periods when the weight of invisibility became almost unbearable. But I kept the knowledge to myself, continuing my shadow work, hoping that revelation wouldn't become necessary, until the day my brother told me to clean out my desk. That evening, after Jason's dismissal, I returned to my modest apartment and pulled out the files I had been compiling for years. Spread across my dining table was the evidence of my contributions: documented strategies, email trails, project plans, financial models, all bearing my digital signatures or containing metadata that proved their origins. I also retrieved the flash drive from the secure location where I had kept it, reviewing again the ownership documents and my grandfather's letter. Everything was in order, legally sound, and properly executed. My grandfather had been thorough in his planning, anticipating potential challenges and addressing them preemptively. I spent hours organizing these materials, preparing for what would come next. This wasn't just about keeping my job. It was about claiming my rightful role in the company I had effectively been running for years. It was about honoring my grandfather's legacy by ensuring Mitchell Precision would continue to thrive under leadership that truly understood its potential. As the night deepened, I made several calls to people whose support would be crucial in the coming days. The first was to Walter Bennett, my grandfather's longtime attorney who had helped him structure the ownership transfer. I showered and dressed with particular care, choosing a tailored charcoal suit that projected authority rather than the deliberately understated attire I usually wore. Today, I wasn't trying to blend into the background. Today, I would finally stand out. As I drove to the office, I reflected on the journey that had led to this moment. I had entered Mitchell Precision as an overlooked daughter, relegated to a position far beneath my qualifications. I had rebuilt the company from within, turning near bankruptcy into thriving success without recognition or credit. Today, that would change. Today, just the operations manager would reveal herself as the true architect of Mitchell Precision's transformation and its rightful leader. I arrived early, before most employees, and made my way directly to the executive boardroom where the transition meeting would be held. I arranged my materials carefully at the seat farthest from where my father and Jason typically sat. I wanted the physical distance to reinforce the shift in dynamics that was about to occur. Walter Bennett arrived next, nodding solemnly as he took a seat beside me. He placed his briefcase on the table, the legal documentation inside representing the foundation of what was to come. Board members began filtering in around 8:45, most offering polite but dismissive nods in my direction, the kind reserved for support staff attending a meeting primarily to take notes or provide operational details if requested. None of them questioned my presence, as operations updates were a standard agenda item, though typically at the end of such meetings. At 8:55, Rachel, David, and Alex arrived together, taking seats near mine in a show of solidarity that raised a few curious eyebrows among the board members. Their presence at a leadership transition meeting was unusual, but not entirely unprecedented given their director-level positions. At precisely 9:00, my father and Jason entered, deep in conversation about the transition announcement scheduled for later that day. They were followed by Stephanie Clark, Jason's fiancée, who would be announced as the new Chief Operating Officer, a position created specifically for her, supposedly more senior than my soon-to-be-eliminated operations manager role. My father looked up, noticing the unusual seating arrangement and the presence of department heads who weren't typically included in board meetings. "Emily," he said, confusion evident in his tone. "I think there's been a misunderstanding about this meeting's attendance." I met his gaze directly, something I had carefully avoided doing for years as part of my strategy to remain unobtrusive. "There's no misunderstanding, Father. Everyone here needs to be present for what's about to happen." Jason laughed dismissively. "We're finalizing leadership transition details. The department heads will be briefed afterward." "Actually," I replied, my voice calm but firm, "we'll be discussing a different transition than the one you're expecting." The room fell silent as the certainty in my tone registered. My father's expression shifted from confusion to concern, while Jason's showed the first flicker of genuine worry I'd seen from him in years. "What exactly does that mean?" my father asked, his voice carrying the authoritative tone he had used throughout my life to end discussions he found uncomfortable. I opened the folder in front of me and slid a document across the table. "It means that before we discuss who will lead Mitchell Precision Technologies going forward, we need to clarify who actually owns it." The document was the ownership certificate for MPT Innovation Trust, clearly showing my name as sole trustee controlling 50% of the company's shares. Beside it, I placed the notarized letter from my grandfather explaining his decision to transfer controlling interest to me. "This is ridiculous," Jason said immediately, though he made no move to examine the documents. "If such an arrangement existed, we would have known about it." "It's time," I said simply when he answered. "I've been expecting this call," he replied, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had witnessed decades of family business dynamics. "What triggered it?" I explained Jason's decision to terminate my position, supposedly part of a restructuring to accommodate his fiancée as the new COO. Walter sighed heavily. "George predicted something like this might happen. He hoped Thomas and Jason would recognize your value on their own, but he prepared for the possibility that they wouldn't. I need your help tomorrow," I said, The board is meeting to formalize my father's retirement and Jason's appointment as CEO. I'll be there, Walter assured me. The documentation is in order. Your grandfather made sure of that. My next call was to Rachel Santos, whose support would be vital in maintaining client relationships through the coming transition. Rachel, I need to speak with you about something important, I began, choosing my words carefully. What would you say if I told you most of the client strategies you've been implementing for the past few years originated with me, not with Jason or my father? There was a brief silence before she laughed. I'd say that explains why they actually worked. Emily, I've suspected something like this for a long time. Jason can barely remember our top clients' names, let alone develop nuanced retention strategies. Her immediate acceptance was encouraging. Things are going to change dramatically tomorrow, I explained without going into details. I may need your support. You have it, she said without hesitation. Whatever you're planning, I'm in your corner. I made similar calls to David Patel and a few other key team members whose loyalty I had earned through years of quiet support and guidance. None seemed surprised by my oblique references to having played a larger role than officially acknowledged. They had seen the disconnect between our leadership's limited understanding and the sophisticated strategies they were supposedly creating. My final call of the night was to Alex Wong, the brilliant engineer who had implemented so many of my technical innovations. I always knew you were the real architect behind our transformation, he said after I explained the situation. No one makes the kind of technical leaps we've achieved based on vague directives from people who don't understand the technology. Tomorrow will be complicated, I warned him. Jason and my father won't give up control easily. Let them try to explain how they developed systems they can't even describe, Alex replied confidently. The technical team knows who really understands our products. We'll stand with you. By the time I finished these conversations, dawn was breaking. I hadn't slept, but I felt more energized than exhausted. For 8 years, I had worked in the shadows, building both Mitchell Precision's success and the network of relationships that would now support my emergence into the light. Walter Bennett cleared his throat. The arrangement absolutely exists and is legally binding. I helped George Mitchell execute these documents 3 months before his death, when he was of sound mind and fully aware of his actions. My father had picked up the ownership certificate, his face paling as he studied it. This can't be right. My father would have told me about such a significant change. He tried to tell you many things over the years, I replied quietly, about the direction of the company, about the importance of understanding the technology we develop, about valuing substance over appearance. You rarely listened. The board members were now examining copies of the documents Walter had distributed. Richard Harmon, our longest-serving board member and my grandfather's friend, nodded slowly. George mentioned concerns to me about the company's future leadership, he admitted. He never specified his solution, but this aligns with our conversations. Jason stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. Even if this document is legitimate, which I'm not conceding, it doesn't change anything about my qualifications to lead this company. I've been directing our strategy for years. Have you? I asked, opening another folder. Perhaps you could explain the technical architecture of our predictive maintenance module, or the machine learning parameters that drive our adaptive control systems, or even the names of our top 5 clients and their primary applications of our technology. Jason's face flushed. CEOs delegate technical details. I focus on big-picture strategy. Strategy like this? I slid another document across the table, the comprehensive 5-year plan that had guided Mitchell Precision's transformation, with metadata and electronic signatures clearly showing I had authored it 3 years earlier. Or perhaps you mean the client retention program that saved North Star Manufacturing as a client? The one I designed and Rachel implemented? Rachel nodded in confirmation. Emily has been the real source of our client strategy for years. Most of us in leadership Positions have known this, even if we didn't discuss it openly. One by one, I presented evidence of my contributions, strategies I had developed, innovations I had conceived, problems I had solved, all while allowing my father and brother to take credit. With each revelation, the room's dynamics shifted perceptibly. Board members who had barely acknowledged my presence when entering were now studying me with new interest and respect. For 8 years, I continued, I have effectively led this company from behind the scenes, watching it transform from a failing enterprise worth barely $3 million into a thriving innovation leader valued at $10 million. I did this not because I craved power or recognition, but because I cared deeply about my grandfather's legacy and the future of Mitchell Precision Technologies. My father had remained silent throughout my presentation, his expression unreadable. Now he looked up, meeting my gaze directly. If all this is true, if you've been capable of this kind of leadership all along, why hide in the shadows? Why pretend to be less than you are? It was a fair question, perhaps the first time he had truly seen me enough to ask one. Because you and Jason would never have accepted my contributions if you'd known they came from me, I answered honestly. You would have dismissed my ideas not because they lacked merit, but because they came from your daughter rather than your son. Jason started to protest, but my father silenced him with a gesture. And now? He asked quietly. What do you want now, Emily? What I've earned, I replied simply. Recognition of my contributions, acknowledgement of my capabilities, and the opportunity to lead Mitchell Precision Technologies as its CEO. Not because I'm your daughter or George's granddaughter, but because I've proven through results that I'm the right person for the role. The boardroom fell silent as the magnitude of the shift became clear. This wasn't just a challenge to a succession plan, it was a fundamental rewriting of the company's leadership narrative and a direct confrontation with biases that had shaped our family dynamics for decades. Jason recovered first, his voice tight with controlled anger. This is absurd. She's manipulated these documents, created false evidence to support her claims. The evidence speaks for itself, Walter Bennett responded calmly. And George Mitchell's intentions are clear in both his legal documentation and his personal correspondence. Board members exchanged glances, recalculating their positions in light of these revelations. Several were examining my strategic documents with growing interest, connecting dots that explained Mitchell Precision's remarkable turnaround under supposedly visionary leadership that had never demonstrated such capability before. My father stood slowly, gathering his dignity around him. I need time to process this information and consult with our attorneys. I propose we adjourn this meeting and reconvene once we've had an opportunity to verify these claims. It was a delaying tactic, an attempt to regain control of a situation that had slipped beyond his grasp. In the past, I might have acquiesced, prioritizing harmony over confrontation. But that time was over. The ownership documentation is unambiguous, I replied firmly. As majority shareholder, I call for an immediate vote on new leadership. According to our bylaws, this is my right. Richard Harmon nodded in agreement. She's correct about the procedural requirements. If a majority shareholder calls for a leadership vote, the board must address it immediately. My father's face tightened with the realization that his authority was truly being challenged. For the first time in my life, I saw uncertainty in his expression, the recognition that he was no longer in control. Jason made one final attempt to reassert himself. This is a hostile takeover disguised as a family dispute. She's manipulated our grandfather, created false documentation, and now wants to steal the company out from under us. Alex Wong, who had remained silent until now, spoke up. With respect, Jason, you can't explain how our primary products work. You've presented technical strategies to clients that were written entirely by Emily. You've taken credit for innovations you don't understand. We've all seen it for years. Other department heads nodded in agreement, the truth finally being, spoken aloud after years of collective pretense. My father looked around the room, recognizing the shifting loyalty. He had always led through authority rather than earned respect, assuming his position was secure because of his title rather than his contributions. Now that foundation was crumbling. "I move that we proceed with the vote," Richard Harmon stated formally, "as called for by the majority shareholder." One by one, board members voiced their agreement, procedural propriety overcoming their surprise at the dramatic turn of events. My father and Jason exchanged glances, realizing they were losing control of not just the meeting, but the company itself. As the secretary distributed voting cards, I felt a strange sense of calm descend. 8 years of working in the shadows, of suppressing my capabilities, of watching others take credit for my achievements, all of it had led to this moment. Whatever happened next, I would no longer be invisible. I would no longer be just the operations manager. The vote was about to begin, and with it, a new chapter for Mitchell Precision Technologies. One where leadership would be based on demonstrated capability rather than gender or birth order, where innovation would be recognized regardless of its source, where the company my grandfather had built would finally have the leader it deserved. The secretary collected the voting cards and began tallying the results while the room waited in tense silence. My father stared straight ahead, his expression unreadable. Jason fidgeted with his expensive watch, a nervous habit I'd observed whenever he felt control slipping away. I maintained my composure, years of practice hiding my emotions serving me well in this crucial moment. Whatever the outcome, I had finally stepped into the light. I had claimed my contributions and challenged the narrative that had diminished me for so long. That alone was a victory worth celebrating. The evening after Jason told me to clear out my desk, I went home to my apartment and spread 8 years of carefully preserved evidence across my dining room table. Meeting notes, strategic plans, product specifications, financial projections, all with metadata and digital signatures that proved I was their creator. My hidden archive of Mitchell Precision's transformation, meticulously documented despite no one ever asking to see it. I studied the flash drive my grandfather had given me in his final days. I'd examined its contents years ago, but had kept the information to myself, hoping that my merit would eventually be recognized without forcing a confrontation. Now I connected it to my laptop and reviewed the documents again, confirming what I already knew. My grandfather had restructured Mitchell Precision's ownership 3 months before his death, placing 50% of the company's shares in a trust with me as the sole trustee and beneficiary. While my father and Jason believed they controlled the company through their combined 50% ownership, my father's 35% and Jason's 15%, they had no idea that the remaining half was firmly in my hands, not dispersed among minor shareholders as they assumed. My grandfather's foresight had given me the legal foundation to claim what I had built. I called Walter Bennett, my grandfather's attorney who had helped structure the ownership transfer. Now in his 70s, Walter had watched Mitchell Precision's evolution with concern, staying in touch with me over the years, though never revealing our contingency plan to my father or brother. "It's time," I said when he answered, explaining Jason's decision to terminate my position. Walter wasn't surprised. "Your grandfather anticipated something like this. He hoped Thomas and Jason would recognize your contributions, but he wanted to ensure you had protection if they didn't. I'll review the documentation tonight and meet you at the office tomorrow." Next, I called Alex Wong, our Chief Technology Officer in all but title. Though officially reporting to Jason, Alex had implemented dozens of my innovations over the years, gradually realizing where the real technical direction was coming from. "Jason's firing me," I explained without preamble. "Restructuring the operations department to install Stephanie as COO." Alex was silent for a moment before responding. "That's not just wrong. It's potentially disastrous for the company. You're the only one who understands how all the pieces fit together." "I need your help tomorrow," I said, Things are going to change dramatically, and I'll need people who understand what's really been happening. Count me in, he replied immediately. Most of the technical team already knows you're the real source of our innovation. They'll back you too. I made similar calls to Rachel Santos in client relations and David Patel in finance, key allies who had implemented my strategies over the years while believing they came through official channels. Both expressed immediate support, neither seeming particularly surprised that I had been the architect of the initiatives that had transformed their departments. By midnight, I had assembled my documentation, confirmed my legal standing, and secured the support of key department heads. I reviewed my grandfather's letter one more time, the personal message he had included with the ownership documents, explaining his decision to make me the controlling shareholder. Emily, I've watched you grow from a curious child into a brilliant engineer and business strategist. Mitchell Precision was always about solving real problems with innovative solutions, not about titles or corner offices. Thomas and Jason have lost sight of that, seeing the company as a status symbol rather than a living creation that needs proper nurturing. I'm giving you controlling interest not because you're my granddaughter, but because you're the only one who truly understands what Mitchell Precision can and should be. Use this power wisely, but use it when necessary. Some battles can't be won from the shadows. As dawn approached, I showered and dressed with unusual care. Today, I wouldn't be the invisible operations manager. I would be claiming my rightful place as Mitchell Precision's leader. I chose a tailored navy suit I rarely wore to the office. Professional, but assertive, a visual break from the deliberately understated attire I'd adopted to avoid drawing attention. The boardroom was scheduled for 9 a.m. to formalize my father's retirement and Jason's appointment as CEO. I arrived at 8:15, finding the building largely empty except for early arriving production staff. I went directly to the executive suite and prepared the boardroom, placing copies of key documents at each seat and setting up my laptop to display the electronic evidence I had accumulated. Walter Bennett arrived at 8:30, carrying a leather portfolio containing the original ownership documentation. His presence was unusual enough that the executive assistant gave him a curious look, but didn't question the longtime company attorney's arrival. "Are you ready for this?" he asked quietly as we reviewed our approach. "I've been preparing for 8 years," I replied, "even if I hoped it wouldn't be necessary." Alex, Rachel, and David arrived together at 8:45, creating a small stir as department heads rarely attended board meetings unless specifically presenting. They took seats along the wall behind where I would sit, a subtle show of support that wouldn't go unnoticed. Board members began arriving shortly after, most nodding politely but dismissively in my direction, assuming I was there to present routine operational updates. Richard Forrester, the longest-serving board member and my grandfather's friend, gave me a more searching look, sensing something unusual in my demeanor and the room's arrangement. My father and Jason arrived at 8:58, deep in conversation about the press release announcing the leadership transition. They were followed by Stephanie Clark, Jason's fiancée, and my supposed replacement, looking polished and confident in her newly anticipated role. Jason barely glanced in my direction as they entered, assuming I was there to present my final departmental update before being dismissed. My father, more observant, noticed the unusual presence of Walter Bennett and the department heads, his expression shifting to one of mild confusion. "Good morning, everyone," my father began at precisely 9 meow, taking his customary seat at the head of the table. "Today marks a significant milestone for Mitchell Precision Technologies as we formalize our leadership transition." I allowed him to proceed through his opening remarks, watching as he outlined his retirement plans and Jason's readiness to assume leadership. Jason sat straighter as my father praised his strategic vision and innovative approach, phrases I had written in proposals that I knew neither of them truly understood. Before we moved to the formal board vote, I interrupted when my father finished his introduction. "There's an important matter of corporate governance that requires the board's attention." My father frowned at the interruption. Emily, we'll get to operational updates after the leadership vote. This isn't an operational update, I replied, my voice steady. It concerns the fundamental ownership structure of Mitchell Precision Technologies. The room fell silent as I opened the folder in front of me, retrieving the document that would change everything. For the past 8 years, Mitchell Precision has operated under a misunderstanding about its ownership structure, I began, passing copies of the trust documentation to each board member. While Thomas Mitchell controls 35% of the company's shares and Jason Mitchell holds 15%, the remaining 50% is not dispersed among minor shareholders as you've been led to believe. My father's expression hardened as he scanned the document. What is this? 3 months before his death, George Mitchell transferred 50% of Mitchell Precision's shares to the MPT Innovation Trust, Walter Bennett explained, his authoritative voice carrying the weight of his decades as company counsel. Emily Mitchell is the sole trustee and beneficiary of that trust, making her the majority shareholder of Mitchell Precision Technologies. Jason laughed dismissively. This is absurd. If such an arrangement existed, we would have known about it. The transfer was properly registered with the SEC, Walter continued calmly. It's been noted in the company's annual reports for the past 8 years, though admittedly in the detailed ownership appendices that few people examine closely. Board members were now studying the documents with growing concern, several flipping through to verify Walter's claims. Richard Forrester nodded slowly as he read. George mentioned concerns to me about the company's future, he acknowledged. He never specified what steps he had taken, but he was worried about the direction Thomas and Jason were taking Mitchell Precision. My father's face had gone pale as he realized the implications. Even if this document is authentic, which I'm not conceding without further review, it doesn't change today's agenda. We're here to formalize my retirement and Jason's appointment as CEO. Actually, it changes everything, I countered, my voice firm but controlled. As majority shareholder, I have the authority to appoint the CEO and executive team, and I'm exercising that authority today. Jason stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This is some kind of bizarre power grab. Even if you somehow control these shares, you're not qualified to make leadership decisions. This was the opening I had been waiting for. I connected my laptop to the boardroom display and opened the first of dozens of files I had prepared. Not qualified? I echoed. Let's discuss qualifications, Jason. Here's the original design. Specification for our predictive maintenance module, the product that now generates 40% of our revenue. Notice the author metadata and digital signature. I highlighted my name and timestamp on the document. Here's the client retention strategy that reversed our churn rate. Again, authored by me. Here's the financial restructuring plan that cut costs by 28% while improving quality metrics. Also my work. One by one, I displayed evidence of my contributions over the years. Strategic plans that had guided our recovery, product innovations that had transformed our market position, client solutions that had secured major contracts. Each document clearly showed my authorship, with dates and electronic signatures that couldn't be disputed. For 8 years, I continued, I have been the architect of Mitchell Precision's transformation from a struggling $3 million company on the verge of bankruptcy to a thriving $10 million industry leader. I did this from behind the scenes, allowing others to take credit while I implemented the changes that saved grandfather's legacy. The boardroom had gone completely silent as the magnitude of my revelation sank in. Board members exchanged glances, connecting dots that suddenly explained how a company led by people with limited technical understanding had somehow produced increasingly sophisticated innovations. This is preposterous, Jason protested, though with noticeably less conviction. Creating a few documents doesn't mean you've been running the company. Alex Wong stood then, his quiet voice carrying unexpected authority. With respect, Jason, Everyone in the technical department has known for years that Emily was the real source of our innovation. You've presented strategies in meetings that you couldn't explain when questioned. You've taken credit for technical solutions you don't understand. Rachel Santos nodded in agreement. The client retention framework that saved our 3 largest accounts came directly from Emily, though it was presented as executive strategy. I've implemented her ideas for years while they were attributed to others. David Patel added his confirmation. The financial models that turned our cash flow positive were developed by Emily, not by the official leadership team. The evidence is undeniable. My father had remained silent throughout these revelations, his expression shifting from disbelief to something more complex, perhaps the first glimmer of recognition that he had fundamentally misjudged his daughter all these years. "Why?" he finally asked, looking directly at me. "If you were capable of all this, why hide in the shadows for 8 years? Why not claim your contributions openly?" It was a fair question, perhaps the first time he had truly seen me clearly, enough to ask one. "Because you and Jason would never have allowed me to implement these changes if you'd known they came from me," I answered honestly. "You would have dismissed my ideas not because they lacked merit, but because they came from your daughter rather than your son." Jason started to object, but my father silenced him with a gesture, his eyes still fixed on me. "And now? What do you want now, Emily?" "What I've earned," I replied simply. "Recognition of my contributions, acknowledgement of my capabilities, and the opportunity to lead Mitchell Precision Technologies as its CEO, not because I'm your daughter or George's granddaughter, but because I've demonstrated through results that I'm the most qualified person for the position." Richard Forrester broke the tense silence that followed. "I believe we need to address the ownership documentation first. If Emily does indeed control 50% of the company's shares, that fundamentally changes today's proceedings." Walter Bennett nodded. "I can personally attest to the authenticity of these documents. I worked with George Mitchell to structure this arrangement, ensuring it was legally sound and properly registered. Emily Mitchell is, without question, the controlling shareholder of Mitchell Precision Technologies." My father cleared his throat, his businessman instincts emerging despite the personal shock. "We'll need to have our corporate counsel review these documents. Until then, I propose we adjourn this meeting." "That would be procedurally inappropriate," Richard countered. "If the majority shareholder is present and has called for a leadership vote, the board is obligated to proceed. That's clearly stated in our bylaws." Board members exchanged glances, recognizing the unprecedented situation they faced. This wasn't just a family disagreement. It was a fundamental challenge to the company's leadership structure and an unveiling of years of misattributed success. "I move that we proceed with a vote on new leadership, as requested by the majority shareholder," Richard stated formally. "Second," another board member added, procedural propriety overcoming the awkwardness of the situation. My father's jaw tightened as he realized control was slipping away. "Very well. We'll proceed with the vote." As the secretary distributed voting cards, the tension in the room was palpable. My father stared straight ahead, his expression unreadable. Jason alternated between glaring at me and nervously checking his phone, likely contemplating how quickly his carefully planned ascension was unraveling. I maintained my composure, years of practice concealing my emotions serving me well in this crucial moment. Whatever happened next, I had finally stepped into the light. I had claimed my contributions and challenged the narrative that had diminished me for so long. That alone was a form of victory. The voting process took less than 5 minutes, though it felt much longer. When the secretary collected the cards and tallied the results, the outcome was decisive. 8 votes in favor of appointing me as CEO, with only my father and Jason opposed. The board has voted to appoint Emily Mitchell as Chief Executive Officer of Mitchell Precision Technologies, effective immediately, Richard announced formally. Additionally, the board acknowledges the evidence presented regarding Ms. Mitchell's contributions to the company's turnaround and expresses gratitude for her service. Jason stood abruptly, his face flushed with anger. "This is ridiculous. You can't seriously believe she's qualified to run this company." "The evidence suggests she already has been," Richard replied calmly. "The board has made its decision." My father rose more slowly, gathering his dignity around him. "I request time to review these developments with our attorneys. This meeting has taken an unexpected turn." "Of course," I agreed. "But the leadership transition will proceed as voted. I'm happy to meet with you privately to discuss your future role with Mitchell Precision, if you wish to maintain one." He nodded stiffly before turning to leave, not meeting my eyes. Jason followed, pausing at the door to deliver a final glare in my direction before storming out. Stephanie hesitated, clearly reassessing her position now that her fiancé's promised leadership role had evaporated. As the board members filed out, several stopped to congratulate me, their earlier dismissiveness replaced with newfound respect, or at least careful recalculation of the company's power dynamics. Richard Forrester was the last to leave, pausing beside my chair. "George would be proud," he said quietly. "Not just of what you've accomplished, but how you've done it. Patient, strategic, and ultimately effective." That was his way too. When the boardroom emptied, I remained seated, allowing myself a moment to absorb what had just happened. After 8 years of working in the shadows, of being underestimated and overlooked, I had finally claimed my rightful place as the leader of Mitchell Precision Technologies. The transition hadn't happened as I had hoped, through recognition of merit rather than through confrontation, but it had happened nonetheless. Alex, Rachel, and David waited silently by the door, giving me the moment I needed before approaching. "That was," Alex began, searching for the right word. "Overdue." Rachel finished for him, her expression a mixture of admiration and residual shock at the morning's revelations. "What happens now?" David asked practically. I stood, smoothing my suit jacket with newly steady hands. "Now we do openly what we've been doing quietly for years. We lead Mitchell Precision forward based on innovation, merit, and actual understanding of our technology and clients." I gathered my materials and headed toward my father's, now my, office, the others following. The news was already spreading throughout the building. Administrative staff looked up with surprised expressions as I passed, clearly having heard something about the dramatic boardroom confrontation. My father's executive assistant, Margaret, who had always treated me with polite dismissiveness, stood as I approached, uncertainty evident in her expression. "Ms. Mitchell," she began formally, "I understand there have been some changes this morning." "Yes, Margaret," I confirmed. "I'll be assuming the CEO position, effective immediately. Please reschedule any meetings my father had today. I'll want to address the senior staff at noon and the entire company at 3. She nodded, professionalism overcoming her surprise. "Of course. Will Mr. Mitchell be—" "I'll discuss transition arrangements with him later today," I interrupted gently. "For now, let's focus on maintaining operational continuity." As I entered what was now my office, I took a moment to absorb the space that had symbolized authority at Mitchell Precision for decades. My father had changed little since my grandfather occupied it. The same heavy wooden desk, the same leather chairs, the same array of industry awards and family photos that portrayed a narrative of seamless male succession from founder to son to grandson. That narrative had just been fundamentally disrupted. I set my laptop on the desk and looked out through the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the production floor. From here, you could see the heart of Mitchell Precision, the engineers developing our systems, the technicians assembling our components, the testing stations verifying our quality. This view had always been symbolic to me. Leadership should never lose sight of what we actually produced. Alex, Rachel, and David had followed me in, still processing the morning's events. "We should prepare for significant fallout," David advised. "Practically. Your father and Jason won't accept this easily." "No," I agreed. "They won't. But they have limited options. The ownership documentation is legally sound, and we've just had a formal board vote confirming my appointment. Their recourse would be litigation, which would be expensive, protracted, and ultimately unsuccessful given the evidence. Not to mention potentially damaging to the company they claim to care about," Rachel added. I nodded. "We need to focus on stabilizing the organization during this transition. Our clients, employees, and partners need reassurance that Mitchell Precision remains strong and committed to its obligations." For the next hour, we outlined a transition plan addressing immediate concerns: communication strategy, leadership, assignments, client reassurance priorities. The work was surprisingly familiar. After all, I had been effectively directing Mitchell Precision's operations for years. The difference was that now I could do so openly, without filtering my decisions, through layers of misdirection. At 11:30, Margaret knocked tentatively on the door. "Ms. Mitchell, your father is here. He's requesting to speak with you privately." I asked the others to excuse us, steeling myself for what would undoubtedly be a difficult conversation. My father entered a moment later, his expression tightly controlled. The shock of the morning's revelations now transformed into something more calculated. "Emily," he began formally, taking a seat without waiting for an invitation. "I've consulted briefly with our attorneys. They confirm that George's trust arrangement appears legally valid, though we'll be investigating the circumstances surrounding its creation." "You'll be wasting your time and money," I replied calmly. Grandfather was of sound mind and perfectly clear about his intentions. Walter Bennett can attest to that, as can his doctor and 2 other witnesses. My father's jaw tightened at my direct response, so different from the deferential tone I had carefully maintained for years. "Perhaps, but the manner in which you've orchestrated this takeover raises serious questions about your judgment and character." I let the irony of this statement hang in the air for a moment. "I didn't orchestrate a takeover, Father. I built this company from near bankruptcy into a thriving enterprise, allowing you and Jason to take credit while I did the actual work. I only revealed the truth when Jason decided to fire me and replace me with his fiancée." "You deliberately concealed your actions for years," he countered. "You manipulated situations from behind the scenes. I implemented changes that saved Grandfather's legacy while working within the constraints of a system that wouldn't have accepted those changes if they'd known the source," I corrected. "I played by the rules you established, the ones that valued appearance over substance, confidence over competence, and birth order over merit. For perhaps the first time in my life, I saw my father genuinely consider my words rather than dismissing them immediately. Something in his expression shifted, a fleeting uncertainty passing across features normally set in absolute certainty. "What do you want now?" he finally asked. "What I've already achieved. Leadership of the company I rebuilt," I replied simply. "As for you and Jason, that depends on what you want. If you're willing to acknowledge reality and contribute based on your actual abilities rather than assumed entitlement, there can be roles for both of you. If not, the severance terms will be generous." He stared at me for a long moment, seemingly seeing me clearly for the first time. "You're more like your grandfather than I realized." "Yes," I agreed. "That's what he saw that you missed." My father stood, straightening his suit jacket with the precise movement he always used when concluding business discussions. "I'll need time to consider my options." "Of course," I nodded. "I'm addressing the senior staff at noon and the full company at 3. It would send a stronger message if you were present, acknowledging the transition." He hesitated, calculation visible in his expression as he weighed various scenarios. "I'll be at the senior staff meeting. We'll discuss Jason's position afterward." After he left, I allowed myself a moment to process what had just occurred. My father, the man who had dismissed my capabilities for decades, was now negotiating, with me as an equal, perhaps even acknowledging my authority for the first time. It wasn't the recognition I had once craved, but it was a shift in our relationship that I hadn't thought possible. At noon, I gathered Mitchell Precision's senior management team in the main conference room. 20 department heads and managers, many of whom had barely acknowledged my presence in previous meetings, now watched me with undisguised curiosity as I took the position at the head of the table previously reserved for my father or Jason. My father entered just as I was about to begin, taking a seat near the door, present but deliberately not claiming a position of authority. The gesture wasn't lost on the management team, whose expressions registered varying degrees of shock at this visible confirmation of the power shift they had been hearing rumors about all morning. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," I began, my voice steady and assured, so different from the carefully modulated tones I had used in the past to avoid drawing attention. "As you may have heard, there have been significant changes in Mitchell Precision's leadership structure. Today, I outlined the situation directly, without dramatic embellishment. The board had confirmed me as CEO following the revelation that I controlled 50% of the company's shares through my grandfather's trust. I acknowledged that many of them would be surprised by this development, given my previous role as operations manager. What some of you may not know," I continued, "is that for the past 8 years, I have been the architect of many of the strategies and innovations that have transformed Mitchell Precision from a struggling company on the verge of bankruptcy into the industry leader we are today." I proceeded to explain my role in developing our key products, restructuring our operations, and creating the client strategies that had fueled our growth. As I spoke, I could see recognition dawning in many faces, sudden understanding of why certain initiatives that seemed to come from executives with limited technical knowledge had nevertheless been surprisingly effective. "Moving forward, Mitchell, Precision will operate with greater transparency and meritocracy," I explained. "Ideas will be valued based on their merit, not their source. Contributions will be recognized regardless of title or position, and our leadership will be based on demonstrated capability rather than traditional expectations." I addressed practical concerns next. There would be no immediate organizational restructuring. Client relationships would continue without disruption, and our strategic direction would maintain its current successful trajectory, though now with explicit rather than shadow leadership. Throughout my presentation, my father remained silent, his expression unreadable as he observed the management team's gradual shift from shock to acceptance and, in many cases, growing enthusiasm. When I opened the floor for questions, the first came from Martin Schmidt, our manufacturing director, who had always been particularly deferential to my father and dismissive of me. "With all due respect, Ms. Mitchell," he began, his tone suggesting, "Limited respect indeed. How can we be confident in your ability to lead this company given your limited executive experience?" Before I could respond, Alex Wong spoke up. "Martin, Emily designed the automated testing protocol that increased your department's throughput by 43% last year. The efficiency model your team has been implementing came directly from her, though it was presented as coming from executive leadership." Others joined in, each realizing and acknowledging ways my hidden influence had improved their departments over the years. As the evidence mounted, Martin's expression shifted from skepticism to uncomfortable reassessment. I allowed this organic recognition to unfold before answering his question directly. "My executive experience is more extensive than my title," suggested Mr. Schmidt. "I've been effectively directing major aspects of this company's operations and strategy for years. The difference now is that I'll be doing so openly, with proper authority rather than through indirect influence." By the end of the hour-long meeting, the initial shock had largely transformed into cautious acceptance or even enthusiasm, particularly Among those who had been frustrated by the disconnect between our previous leadership's limited technical understanding and the sophisticated strategies they supposedly created. As the meeting concluded, department heads approached me individually, some offering congratulations, others asking clarifying questions about how this transition would affect their specific areas. The overall mood was one of cautious optimism, the organization beginning to process this fundamental shift in understanding who had actually been guiding their success. My father remained seated as others filed out, waiting until we were alone before speaking. They accepted it more readily than I expected, he observed, his tone neutral but attentive. Many of them suspected something wasn't quite adding up, I replied. They've been implementing sophisticated strategies supposedly created by leadership that couldn't explain the underlying principles. Today just confirmed what they had begun to piece together on their own. He nodded slowly, something almost like grudging respect crossing his features. You've planned this carefully. No, I corrected. I never planned for confrontation. I documented everything carefully in case it became necessary. But I hoped my contributions would eventually be recognized without revealing grandfather's contingency arrangement. Jason's decision to fire me forced my hand. For a moment, my father looked genuinely conflicted, perhaps seeing for the first time how his own biases and assumptions had created this situation. Jason won't accept this easily, he finally said. He's always believed the company would be his. Belief doesn't create capability, I replied simply. Mitchell Precision needs leadership that understands both its technology and its market. Jason has demonstrated neither. My father stood, adjusting his suit jacket in the habitual gesture that signaled the end of a conversation. I'll speak with him before your company address this afternoon. It would be best if he were present, acknowledging the transition rather than appearing to oppose it. I nodded my agreement, recognizing the practical wisdom in this approach despite the personal complexity it entailed. As my father turned to leave, he paused at the door. You rebuilt the company? He asked, a genuine question rather than a challenge. Yes, I answered simply. It was 6 months from bankruptcy when I joined. The recovery wasn't accidental or due to market conditions. It was the result of specific strategies, innovations, and decisions, most of which came from me, implemented through others. He absorbed this statement, his expression unreadable. George saw what I missed, he finally acknowledged, more to himself than to me, before walking out. I remained at the conference table for a few minutes after he left, processing the conversation. It wasn't an apology or even a complete recognition of the injustice I had experienced, but it was perhaps the first step toward a new understanding between us, one based on reality rather than the comfortable illusions that had shaped our family dynamics for decades. The company-wide announcement that afternoon would be another milestone in this transformation. Soon, everyone at Mitchell Precision would understand that just the operations manager had been its true leader all along, and now would be leading openly, with full authority to guide the company my grandfather had founded and I had saved. My first month as CEO of Mitchell Precision Technologies unfolded with a mixture of exhilaration and sobering responsibility. The initial shock that rippled through the company gradually transformed into a new operating rhythm as people adjusted to the reality that the former operations manager was now firmly in control. The company-wide address I delivered that first afternoon had been a pivotal moment. With my father standing silently at the back of the room and Jason noticeably absent, I explained the leadership transition to over 200 employees gathered in our main production area. Many of you know me as Emily from operations, I began, standing on the small platform we used for company announcements. What you may not know is that for the past 8 years, I have been deeply involved in shaping Mitchell Precision's strategic direction, product development, and operational transformations, work that has often been attributed to others. I explained the ownership structure my grandfather had established, the board's confirmation of my position as CEO, and my vision for Mitchell Precision's future. The reactions ranged from open shock to knowing nods from those who had long suspected something wasn't quite adding up about our previous leadership's supposed technical acumen. Moving forward, Mitchell Precision will operate with greater transparency, meritocracy, and purpose, I concluded. Your contributions will be valued based on their impact, not on title or position. Ideas will be judged by their merit, not their source. And our company will continue to innovate and excel, not despite this change in leadership, but because of it. The questions that followed were direct, sometimes uncomfortably so. How had I hidden my role for so long? Why had I allowed others to take credit for my work? What would happen to existing leadership? I answered honestly, explaining the realities of the situation I had faced and my commitment to preserving my grandfather's legacy even when that meant working from the shadows. In the days that followed, I moved systematically to establish my authority while maintaining operational stability. My first executive decision was appointing Alex Wong as Chief Technology Officer, Rachel Santos as Chief Client Officer, and David Patel as Chief Financial Officer, formalizing the leadership roles they had effectively filled without recognition for years. Stephanie Clark, Jason's fiancée and my intended replacement as operations head, presented a more delicate challenge. After a frank conversation about her qualifications and intentions, I offered her a position leading our process improvement initiatives, a role that would utilize her actual skills rather than serving as a power base for Jason. To my surprise, she accepted, telling me privately that she'd had reservations about being positioned as a figurehead in a technical company she didn't fully understand. Jason assured me it was just a political appointment, she admitted during our one-on-one meeting. He said I wouldn't need to understand the technical details, just manage the people. That's not how Mitchell Precision operates anymore, I told her. Every leader here needs to understand what we do and why it matters. My father's response to the transition proved more complex. After initially indicating he would consider a continued role with the company, he ultimately decided on a clean break, announcing his full retirement 2 weeks after my appointment as CEO. Our final meeting, in what was now my office, carried decades of complicated history. I've decided it's best for everyone if I step away completely, he said, his expression controlled but not hostile. A company can't function effectively with former CEOs looking over the current leadership's shoulder. I nodded, recognizing the wisdom in this decision despite the personal complexity it represented. I appreciate your consideration. The board will want to recognize your years of service appropriately. He waved this away with a dismissive gesture. No need for ceremonial gestures. The severance terms are fair. As he prepared to leave, he paused at the door, looking back at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Your grandfather saw something in you that I missed. I'm beginning to understand what it was. It wasn't an apology for years of dismissal and underestimation, but it was perhaps as close as Thomas Mitchell would ever come to acknowledging his error in judgment. I accepted it as such, nodding slightly as he departed Mitchell Precision. Technologies for the final time. Jason's response was less measured. After his conspicuous absence from the company-wide announcement, he launched what could only be described as a campaign to undermine my leadership. It began with a series of calls to key clients, suggesting that the company was in turmoil following an unexpected and concerning leadership change. Rachel Santos brought this to my attention after receiving worried calls from 3 major accounts. He's telling them the company is unstable and that our product development will suffer without his vision, she reported, unable to keep the irony from her voice on the last word. Rather than responding defensively, I decided to address this challenge directly. I personally called each client Jason had contacted, explaining the transition and offering to demonstrate our latest innovations. technologies Jason himself couldn't explain but that I had helped develop. I understand you may have concerns about our recent leadership changes, I told the CTO of Meridian Manufacturing, one of our largest clients. I'd like to invite you to visit our facility next week for a full demonstration of our next-generation predictive maintenance system. I'll personally walk you through the technology and our development roadmap. These direct engagements proved remarkably effective. Clients who spoke with me quickly realized that the new CEO understood the technology and their needs far better than the previous leadership had. Several commented that technical discussions were suddenly more substantive and specific than they had been in previous years. For the first time, I feel like I'm talking to someone who actually understands what we need, not just selling me something, the Meridian CTO commented at the end of our meeting. But Jason wasn't finished. When client outreach failed to create the crisis of confidence he had hoped for, he escalated to more desperate measures. Through contacts at an industry publication, he planted a story questioning Mitchell Precision's stability and suggesting that proprietary technology might be compromised by inexperienced leadership. The article, while carefully avoiding direct defamation, implied that major clients were reconsidering their relationships with Mitchell Precision, a claim that was demonstrably false based on our recent contract renewals. More concerningly, it hinted at potential intellectual property vulnerabilities in our systems that might put client data at risk. This required a more formal response. Working with our legal team, I drafted a point-by-point rebuttal backed by technical documentation and client testimonials. Rather than engaging in a public relations battle, we presented this information directly to the publication's editors, along with a firmly worded request for a correction. Simultaneously, I accelerated the release of our next-generation security framework, a project I had been developing with Alex's team for months. We invited industry analysts to a comprehensive technical demonstration showcasing capabilities that clearly contradicted the article's insinuations about our technology. The publication issued a retraction within days, and the industry response to our security framework was overwhelmingly positive. What had been intended as a damaging attack had instead become an opportunity to demonstrate our technical leadership more publicly than we had initially planned. Jason's final attempt at undermining my leadership came through legal channels. 6 weeks after my appointment as CEO, Mitchell Precision received notice of a lawsuit challenging the validity of my grandfather's trust arrangement. The filing, led by Jason with my father conspicuously absent, claimed that George Mitchell had been unduly influenced during his final months and lacked the capacity to make significant business decisions. Walter Bennett was unsurprised when I called him about the legal challenge. "We anticipated this possibility," he reminded me. "Your grandfather was very thorough in documenting his mental capacity and intentions." The case never made it past the preliminary hearing. The judge, reviewing the extensive documentation of my grandfather's medical condition, the professional assessments of his cognitive function, and the video recordings of his explanation for the ownership transfer, dismissed the challenge as without merit. The evidence clearly establishes that George Mitchell was of sound mind and acted deliberately in establishing the trust arrangement, the judge wrote in her opinion. Furthermore, the plaintiff's claims of undue influence are unsupported by any credible evidence. With this final defeat, Jason disappeared from Mitchell Precision's orbit. Industry contacts reported that he had moved to the West Coast, attempting to reposition himself as a technology investor despite his limited understanding of the field. I felt no satisfaction in his departure, only a sense of relief that the company could now move forward without the distraction of internal power struggles. By the end of my second month as CEO, the transition period had largely settled. The day-to-day operations of Mitchell Precision continued with surprising smoothness, unsurprising perhaps, given that many of the systems and processes had been designed by me in the first place. The difference now was that I could refine and improve them openly, without the elaborate maneuvering previously required to implement changes from behind the scenes. The most significant shift was in our innovation pipeline, with Alex Wong now officially recognized as CTO and given proper authority to direct our technical resources. The pace of product development accelerated dramatically. Ideas that previously had to navigate circuitous paths through the organization could now be evaluated and implemented directly, reducing our time to market by nearly 40%. Our third-generation predictive maintenance system, which had been in development for months under my quiet direction, launched to industry acclaim. The platform's ability to integrate machine learning with real-time sensor data provided manufacturing clients with unprecedented visibility into potential equipment failures, reducing downtime by an average of 68% in initial deployments. This represents a fundamental leap forward in industrial automation, noted one industry publication, the same one that had published Jason's attempted hit piece months earlier. Mitchell Precision has established itself as the clear technology leader in a field increasingly defined by predictive capabilities rather than reactive monitoring. The financial impact was immediate and substantial. New contracts increased by 35% in the first quarter under my leadership, with existing clients upgrading to our new platforms at twice the historical rate. Our valuation, already healthy at $10 million before the transition, climbed to $14 million by the end of my third month as CEO. But perhaps the most meaningful transformation occurred in our company culture. With artificial hierarchies and misattributed achievements removed, Mitchell Precision became a more open, collaborative environment where ideas could flow freely regardless of their source. I implemented a new innovation program that allowed any employee to submit product or process improvements directly to a review committee composed of peers from various departments. Ideas were evaluated on their merit, rather than on the title of the person suggesting them. In the first month alone, this program generated 17 viable improvements, 3 of which were immediately implemented. Kate Rodriguez, who had been quietly implementing my hiring protocols while officially reporting to Jason, now headed our newly established talent development department. Under her leadership, we systematically addressed the compensation inequities that had accumulated over years of favoritism-based advancement. For the first time, I feel like we're actually valuing people based on their contributions, she told me during a review meeting. The difference in morale is palpable. This new approach to talent management yielded unexpected benefits. Mitchell Precision had historically struggled to attract top technical talent, losing candidates to more prestigious companies despite offering competitive salaries. Now, with our growing reputation for innovation and merit-based advancement, we began successfully recruiting specialists who previously wouldn't have considered us. Amelia Chen, a leading machine learning expert who joined our R&D team from a major tech company, explained her decision during her onboarding interview. I was impressed that your CEO could have a detailed technical discussion about neural network architectures. That's rare in this industry, especially in more traditional manufacturing companies. By the end of my first 100 days as CEO, Mitchell Precision Technologies had been fundamentally transformed, not just in leadership structure, but in operational approach, innovation capacity, and organizational culture. The company that had once been 6 months from bankruptcy under my father and brother's leadership was now thriving, growing at a pace that exceeded even my optimistic projections. Throughout this period of intense change and growth, I maintained a careful balance between asserting my authority and acknowledging the contributions of others. Unlike my father and brother, who had claimed credit for work they didn't understand, I made a point of recognizing the talents and efforts of the team members who executed our vision. During our quarterly all-hands meeting, I stood on the same platform where I had announced the leadership transition 3 months earlier. Looking out at the assembled employees, now numbering over 240 with our recent growth, I felt a sense of pride not just in what we had accomplished, but in how we had accomplished it. Mitchell Precision's success isn't the result of any single person's vision, I told them. It's the product of collective expertise, dedication, and innovation. qualities that have always existed in this company, but that we're now fully recognizing and rewarding. I highlighted specific achievements from departments across the organization, naming individual contributors whose ideas had improved our products or processes. The atmosphere was markedly different from similar meetings under previous leadership, where my father and Jason would claim credit for successes while deflecting responsibility for failures. As the company continued to evolve, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought us to this point. For 8 years, I had worked from the shadows, building Mitchell Precision while others took credit for my achievements. The irony wasn't lost on me that in finally stepping into the light and claiming my rightful role, I had created an environment where individual contributions were properly recognized regardless of position or title. One afternoon, about 4 months into my tenure as CEO, I received an unexpected visitor. Margaret, my executive assistant, formerly my father's, announced that Richard Forrester, our longest-serving board member and my grandfather's friend, had stopped by without an appointment. "Send him in," I said, curious about this unscheduled visit from the man who had been one of my strongest supporters during the leadership transition. Richard entered with the careful movement of his 80 years, declining my offer of assistance as he settled into the chair across from my desk. He looked around the office, noting the changes I had made to what had once been my father's domain. The heavy wooden furniture had been replaced with more modern pieces, the wall of family photos updated to include images of our technical teams and manufacturing floor, and my grandfather's original technical drawings now hung prominently where golf tournament trophies had once stood. "You've made this your own," he observed with approval. "George would have liked it." "Thank you," I replied. "Was there something specific you wanted to discuss, Richard? The quarterly board meeting isn't for another 2 weeks." He smiled, slightly. "No official business today. I was going through some old papers and found something I thought you should have." From his jacket pocket, he withdrew a sealed envelope, yellowed slightly with age, and placed it on the desk between us. My name was written on the front in my grandfather's distinctive handwriting. "George gave this to me about a month before. He passed," Richard explained. "Asked me to hold on to it and give it to you when the time was right. With everything that's happened these past few months, I think that time has come." I picked up the envelope, feeling an unexpected surge of emotion at seeing my grandfather's handwriting again after all these years. Did he say what it contained? Richard shook his head. "Only that it was for you when you were ready. I'll leave you to it." After he departed, I sat for several minutes with the unopened envelope in my hands, momentarily transported back to childhood afternoons spent in my grandfather's workshop, learning about control systems and circuit design, while he patiently explained concepts far beyond what most children would understand. Finally, I carefully opened the sealed envelope to find a single page of handwritten text, dated 3 months before my grandfather's death. "My dear Emily, if you're reading this, then 2 things have happened. I'm no longer with you, and you've finally claimed your rightful place at Mitchell Precision Technologies. I've watched you grow from a curious child into a brilliant engineer and strategic thinker. The company needs exactly what you offer: technical understanding combined with business acumen and genuine care for what we've built together. Your father and brother see leadership differently than we do. They measure it by appearance rather than substance, by confidence rather than competence. I've tried to help them understand what truly matters in this business, but they remain fixed in their thinking. I've taken steps to ensure Mitchell Precision's future by arranging for controlling ownership to pass to you. Walter has handled the legal details, and Richard will provide guidance when needed. My hope is that you'll never need to use this leverage, that your contributions will be recognized naturally and your leadership accepted based on merit alone. But I've lived long enough to know that sometimes the right outcome requires a push in the right direction. Remember that true leadership isn't about titles or corner offices. It's about solving real problems, creating value that matters, and bringing out the best in the people around you. Mitchell Precision was founded on these principles, and I trust you to preserve them. Whatever challenges you face in claiming your rightful role, know that I saw your potential long before anyone else, and I have absolute faith in your ability to lead Mitchell Precision into its next chapter. With love and complete confidence, Grandpa George the Fur read the letter 3 times, each reading bringing a different emotion to the surface. First came nostalgia, the bittersweet memory of the grandfather who had seen my potential when others couldn't or wouldn't. Then gratitude for his foresight in creating the mechanisms that had allowed me to claim leadership when merit alone proved insufficient. Finally, a renewed sense of purpose and responsibility to honor the trust he had placed in me. The letter confirmed what I had always suspected but never heard directly from my grandfather. He had created the trust arrangement not just as a contingency plan, but with the explicit expectation that I would eventually need to use it to claim leadership of Mitchell Precision. He had known my father and brother would never recognize my contributions or accept my leadership without being forced to do so. There was something both validating and sobering in this knowledge. My grandfather had seen clearly what I had spent years hoping would change, that in my father and brother's eyes, my gender would always outweigh my capabilities. He had given me the tools to overcome this barrier not because he wanted to create family conflict, but because he understood it was the only way the company he had built would survive and thrive. I carefully returned the letter to its envelope and placed it in my desk drawer, next to the flash drive that had contained the legal documentation of my ownership. Together, they represented my grandfather's final gift to me. Not just legal control of Mitchell Precision Technologies, but the wisdom to understand what that control was for and how it should be used. That evening, as I walked through the production facility after most employees had departed, I found myself pausing by the original workshop where George Mitchell had built his first control systems 4 decades earlier. We had preserved this space as something of a museum, a reminder of our origins and the innovative spirit that had launched the company. My grandfather's workbench remained as he had left it, tools arranged with the precision of someone who understood that organization was essential to complex work. On the wall hung framed schematics of his earliest designs, revolutionary for their time and how they approached industrial automation challenges. I ran my fingers along the worn edge of the workbench, feeling a connection to the man who had seen my potential and ensured I would have the opportunity to fulfill it. The letter had brought a sense of closure to questions that had lingered since his death. Whether he had truly intended for me to lead Mitchell Precision, whether he had understood the barriers I would face, whether he had anticipated the need for the dramatic confrontation that ultimately occurred. Now I knew with certainty he had seen it all coming, had prepared me as best he could, and had left me the tools I would need when the moment of reckoning arrived. His confidence in me hadn't been misplaced. Mitchell Precision Technologies was thriving under my leadership, building on his legacy while creating new innovations he could never have imagined. As I turned to leave the workshop, my gaze fell on a small framed quote hanging beside my grandfather's original drafting table. It was something he had often said, words I had carried with me through years of working in the shadows. True innovation isn't about who gets the credit. It's about solving problems that matter. I smiled, recognizing how that philosophy had guided my approach during the years when I rebuilt Mitchell Precision from behind the scenes, accepting that others would take credit for my work as long as the company survived and thrived. There had been a kind of freedom in that invisibility, the ability to focus entirely on solutions rather than recognition. But there was also power in finally standing in the light, in demonstrating through visible leadership that innovation and problem-solving weren't defined by gender or title but by capability and vision. The company my grandfather had founded and that I had saved was now positioned to grow in ways neither of us could have fully imagined. As I left the building that evening, I felt a sense of completion, not of my work, which was ongoing and evolving, but of the journey that had brought me to this point. The underestimated daughter, dismissed as just the operations manager, had transformed Mitchell Precision Technologies from a failing legacy company into an industry leader. And she was just getting started. The contrast between my current reality and where I had been just 6 months earlier sometimes struck me with startling clarity. Then I had been Emily from operations, the overlooked daughter whose suggestions were dismissed without consideration, whose expertise was ignored despite her qualifications, whose contributions disappeared into the background while others claimed credit. Now, I was Emily Mitchell, CEO of Mitchell Precision Technologies, a recognized industry leader whose technical understanding and strategic vision had transformed a struggling company into a thriving enterprise valued at over $14 million and growing. The most profound change wasn't in my title or authority, but in the freedom to lead openly and directly. Ideas that previously had to navigate elaborate, circuitous paths through the organization to avoid revealing their source could now be implemented straightforwardly. Innovations that once required careful attribution to others to ensure acceptance could now be developed and deployed based solely on their merit. This transparency had accelerated every aspect of our operations. Product development cycles shortened by 40% when engineers could work directly with leadership that understood their challenges and capabilities. Client relationships deepened when customers realized they were speaking with executives who genuinely comprehended their technical needs, rather than merely reciting marketing talking points. Even our manufacturing efficiency improved as processes I had designed, but could never fully implement under previous leadership were now fully deployed across our production facilities. Overall productivity increased by 32% in the first 6 months of my leadership, with correspondingly improved margins and reduced waste. The financial results spoke for themselves. Our valuation continued to climb, reaching $16 million by the end of my second quarter as CEO. New contracts increased by 48% compared to the previous year, and our client retention rate rose to an unprecedented 98%. We had expanded our workforce by nearly 20%, adding technical talent that previously wouldn't have considered Mitchell Precision a destination employer. But perhaps the most satisfying transformation was in our company culture. The artificial hierarchies and political maneuvering that had characterized my father and brother's leadership had given way to a more transparent, meritocratic environment where ideas were valued regardless of their source. The innovation program I had implemented, allowing any employee to submit improvement suggestions directly to a cross-functional review committee, had generated over 40 viable projects in its first 6 months. Several had already been implemented, creating measurable improvements in our products and processes. More importantly, the program had fostered a sense of ownership and engagement across all levels of the organization. One afternoon, as I walked through the engineering department, I noticed a small group gathered around a whiteboard covered in system architecture diagrams. Among them was Miguel Reyes, a junior engineer who had joined Mitchell Precision just 3 months earlier. He was explaining a potential refinement to our predictive algorithm framework, while senior team members, including Alex Wong, listened attentively. I paused to observe, remembering countless similar moments from my years as operations manager when my technical suggestions had been dismissed without consideration by the very people who now claimed credit for them. The contrast between that environment and what I was witnessing, a junior team member's ideas being evaluated on their merit rather than dismissed based on his position, crystallized how thoroughly Mitchell Precision had transformed under my leadership. Later that day, during my weekly meeting with Alex, I mentioned the exchange I had observed. Miguel's approach to feature extraction in noisy data environments is quite innovative, I noted. Are we implementing his suggestions? Alex nodded. Already in progress. His background in signal processing brings a perspective we've been missing. Under the previous regime, we'd probably have lost him within 6 months. He's exactly the kind of talent that got frustrated and left when their ideas were ignored. And now? Now he's thriving, Alex replied simply. They all are. The difference in the engineering team's morale and productivity is night and day compared to a year ago. People feel heard, valued, and challenged in the right ways. This transformation extended beyond our technical departments. Rachel Santos reported similar improvements in client services, where team members who previously had to navigate elaborate approval chains to address customer needs could now respond more directly and effectively. Remember how we used to route even minor client requests through 3 layers of management, only to have them bottlenecked on Jason's desk for weeks? She asked during our monthly review. Now our average response time has dropped from 12 days to less than 2. Client satisfaction scores are at an all-time high. David Patel in finance had implemented a more transparent budgeting process, giving department heads greater visibility into and control over their resources while maintaining appropriate fiscal oversight. We've eliminated the arbitrary budget cuts and reallocations that used to happen whenever your father or Jason wanted to fund a pet project, he explained. Departments can actually plan and execute without constant financial disruption. These operational improvements, while significant, were merely the foundation for the more substantial innovation work now accelerating across the organization. With proper leadership and resources, our R&D team had developed 3 major new product initiatives that positioned Mitchell Precision at the forefront of industrial automation technology. Our next-generation adaptive control system, which could reconfigure manufacturing processes in real time based on changing conditions, had attracted attention from industry leaders who previously wouldn't have considered us technology innovators. The integrated machine learning capabilities I had been quietly developing for years were now fully implemented, providing predictive insights that competitors couldn't match. We're not just catching up to the market leaders anymore, Alex observed during a product strategy session. We're defining where the industry is going. The questions we're getting from clients have shifted from, "Can you match competitor X's capabilities?" to, "How soon can we implement your new system?" This technological leadership translated directly to financial performance. Our profit margins expanded as clients proved willing to pay premium prices for capabilities they couldn't find elsewhere. Our sales cycles shortened as the value proposition became clearer and more compelling. Our recurring revenue increased as customers upgraded to subscription-based service models that provided ongoing optimization rather than one-time purchases. 6 months into my tenure as CEO, Mitchell Precision Technologies had transformed from a struggling legacy company fighting to remain relevant into an industry leader driving innovation and growth. The company my grandfather had founded and that I had rebuilt from the shadows was now thriving in the light, its true potential finally unleashed. And for the first time in my professional life, I was receiving proper recognition for my contributions. Industry publications that had previously quoted Jason's vapid statements about visionary leadership now sought my perspective on technical trends and market dynamics. Clients who had dealt with my father and brother without ever knowing who really developed their solutions now engaged directly with me, appreciating the depth of understanding I brought to discussions of their needs. Most importantly, I was leading openly and authentically, without the elaborate mechanisms of indirect influence I had been forced to employ for years. Ideas could flow directly from conception to implementation, without being disguised or attributed to others. Innovations could be developed and deployed based solely on their merit, not on who proposed them or how they fit into internal power. Dynamics. The journey from overlooked operations manager to recognized CEO had been neither easy nor straightforward. It had required years of patient work from the shadows, careful documentation of my contributions, strategic relationship building, and ultimately a direct confrontation with the power structure that had systematically undervalued me. But as I looked across the transformed organization that Mitchell Precision had become, I knew without question that the journey had been necessary and the outcome worth fighting for. Not just for me personally, but for the company my grandfather had founded, the employees who now thrived in a meritocratic environment, and the clients who benefited from truly innovative solutions to their manufacturing challenges. Mitchell Precision Technologies was no longer just surviving, it was leading, innovating, and growing. And I was no longer just the operations manager, I was the CEO who had made it possible. 1 year after claiming my rightful position as CEO, I stood at the podium accepting the Regional Business Innovation Award on behalf of Mitchell Precision Technologies. The audience of industry leaders applauded as I described our company's transformation and technological breakthroughs. How different from the boardroom scene a year earlier, when Jason had told me to clear out my desk, dismissing 8 years of my hidden contributions with a casual wave of his hand. Mitchell Precision had flourished beyond even my optimistic projections. Our valuation had reached $22 million, more than doubling since I took over. Our workforce had grown to over 300 employees, and our technologies were setting new industry standards. The most rewarding transformation was watching talented individuals thrive in our new meritocratic culture. Engineers who had quietly implemented my ideas for years now innovated boldly with proper recognition. Team members who had been overlooked based on gender or background were advancing based on their actual capabilities. Last month, we'd moved into new headquarters, a modern facility with state-of-the-art labs and manufacturing spaces. At the heart of the building stood my grandfather's original workshop, preserved exactly as he had left it. A physical reminder of our origins and the innovative spirit that had launched Mitchell Precision 4 decades earlier. Jason had eventually settled in California, taking a position with a venture capital firm where his networking skills proved useful despite his technical limitations. My father had purchased a lake house in retirement, maintaining a distant but cordial relationship through occasional phone calls. As I concluded my acceptance speech, I glanced at the award's inscription. For revolutionary contributions to predictive maintenance technologies and exemplary business leadership. This recognition belongs to our entire team, I told the IWD audience. At Mitchell Precision, we believe innovation comes from valuing ideas based on merit, not source. From creating environments where talent can flourish regardless of title or background. After the ceremony, Alex approached with a prototype of our newest sensing technology. "Ready to change the industry again?" he asked with a smile. I nodded, examining the elegant solution we'd developed together. The journey from overlooked operations manager to recognized industry leader had been neither easy nor direct. But standing there, holding the physical manifestation of our newest innovation, I knew this was exactly where I belonged. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.